The memory of that night still plays in my mind like a broken record. The way Madison stood at my doorstep, pressing the doorbell over and over again at 11:30 on a Wednesday night, her handwriting growing more desperate with each note she slipped under my door. But let me start from the beginning. From a time when we were inseparable, when I believed our friendship could survive anything, even the darkest moments life threw at us. Madison and I had been best friends for 22 years, ever since that day in 3rd grade when she noticed I was sitting alone at lunch, my stomach growling because I'd forgotten my lunch money again. Without hesitation, she'd walked over with her strawberry fruit leather and broken it in half, placing the bigger piece in front of me with a smile that lit up her whole face. That simple act of kindness started a friendship I thought would last forever. Throughout elementary school, we were the kind of best friends teachers had to separate in class because we couldn't stop giggling at inside jokes. In middle school, when other girls were forming cliques and turning friendships into weapons, Madison and I remained solid, spending Friday nights painting each other's nails and dreaming about our futures. We planned to be each other's maids of honor, to raise our children together, to grow old on neighboring porches sipping sweet tea and reminiscing about our wild younger days. High school brought its challenges, as it does for most teenage girls, but we navigated them together. When Brandon Miller broke my heart at the winter formal, Madison was there with a pint of mint chocolate chip ice cream and a playlist of empowering songs. When her parents went through a messy divorce junior year, I snuck her out to late-night drives where we'd park by the lake and talk until the sun came up. We applied to the same colleges, celebrated when we both got into State University, and spent 4 years as roommates, studying for exams in our tiny dorm room and staying up too late discussing everything from philosophy to which coffee shop made the best lattes. After graduation, life pulled us in slightly different directions, as adult life tends to do. I pursued marketing while Madison went into event planning, but we still met for brunch every Sunday without fail. When I got married to Matthew 3 years ago, Madison was right there beside me as my maid of honor, fixing my veil and making sure my mascara didn't run when I cried during the vows. When she met Connor at a networking event and fell head over heels, I was the first person she called, breathless with excitement about this architect who quoted her favorite movies and made her laugh until her stomach hurt. Everything started to change when Madison got pregnant last July. The day she found out, she video called me from her bathroom at 7 in the morning, holding the pregnancy test up to the camera and screaming, "Finally, finally, finally," over and over again. She and Connor had been trying for almost 2 years, and the joy in her voice made my heart swell with happiness for her. I immediately started planning how I'd be the best honorary aunt, already bookmarking articles about baby development and making mental notes about nursery themes. When Madison sent me her Pinterest board for the baby shower 6 weeks later, I volunteered to plan the entire thing before she even had to ask. This was my best friend's first baby, the culmination of years of hoping and trying, and I wanted everything to be absolutely perfect for her. I threw myself into the planning with an enthusiasm that surprised even me, staying up late researching the best local bakeries for custom cookies, comparing prices for flower arrangements, and practicing my calligraphy so I could hand-letter each invitation personally. I spent 3 weeks working on those invitations, 52 of them in total, each one carefully crafted with Madison's favorite shade of dusty rose ink. My hand cramped after the first dozen, but I pushed through, imagining the look on her face when she saw them. I coordinated dietary requirements for 38 guests, creating a complex spreadsheet to track who was gluten-free, who was vegan, who had nut allergies, and who followed Madison's mother-in-law's peculiar restriction against eating foods that started with the letter T. The venue search took me all over the city. Madison had her heart set on a garden party theme, but finding an outdoor space that could accommodate our guest list, had adequate parking, and wouldn't break the budget proved challenging. I visited 14 different locations, taking photos and notes, measuring spaces and checking availability. When I finally found the perfect spot, a charming tea garden with a covered pavilion and blooming wisteria, I nearly cried with relief. For the decorations, Madison had sent me approximately 100 Pinterest images with a note saying, "Something like this, but better." I drove 3 hours round trip to a specialty party supply store because they were the only place that carried the exact shade of blush pink balloons she wanted. I spent entire weekends crafting paper flowers, following YouTube tutorials until my fingers were stained with glue, and my dining room table was permanently covered in tissue paper scraps. Each flower took about 20 minutes to make, and I needed at least 60 to achieve the lush garden party aesthetic Madison envisioned. During this time, Madison and I were talking more than we had in years. She'd call me during her lunch breaks to discuss menu options, text me photos of potential outfits for the shower, and send voice messages late at night when pregnancy insomnia kept her awake. I treasured these moments of connection, feeling like I was truly part of her pregnancy journey. We'd joke about how her baby would call me Aunt Sarah, how I'd be the cool aunt who'd sneak the kid extra dessert and teach them all the best dance moves. Then everything changed with a single phone call. It was a Tuesday morning, and I was at work when I felt the cramping start. At first, I ignored it, thinking it was just stress from a demanding client presentation. But when I stood up to go to the bathroom and felt the warm rush of blood, I knew something was terribly wrong. I barely remember the drive to the hospital, just the way my hands shook on the steering wheel and how I had to pull over twice because I couldn't see through my tears. The emergency room was cold and sterile, all harsh fluorescent lights and the sharp smell of disinfectant. I sat there for 3 hours, filling out paperwork with trembling hands, watching other women come and go, some with swollen bellies, some with newborns, while I bled through the industrial grade pads the triage nurse had given me. When the doctor finally confirmed what I already knew in my heart, that I was having a miscarriage, I felt something inside me shatter. I hadn't even known I was pregnant for very long, just 2 weeks, but those 14 days had been filled with secret joy and tentative dreams. Matthew and I had been trying for a year, and when that second line appeared on the test, faint but unmistakable, I'd allowed myself to imagine a future where Madison's baby and mine would grow up together, best friends just like their mothers. Leaving the hospital, I called Madison without thinking. It was muscle memory, the automatic response to call my best friend when my world was falling apart. She answered on the 3rd ring, slightly out of breath, probably from climbing stairs since the elevator in her office building was perpetually broken. When I told her about the miscarriage, my voice breaking on the word, she went completely silent. I could hear her breathing, could hear the muffled sounds of her office in the background. But she didn't say anything for what felt like an eternity. Finally, she spoke. "Oh man, Sarah, that really sucks." Her voice was flat, detached, like I'd just told her about a parking ticket or a delayed flight. I heard the distinctive click of her acrylic nails against her phone screen, the sound I recognized from countless conversations when she was multitasking, only half listening while scrolling through Instagram or answering emails. I waited for more, for the comforting words I'd heard her offer to other friends going through hard times, for the immediate offer to come over with ice cream and tissues. Instead, after another long pause, she sighed. "Well, try not to stress too much about it. I can definitely find someone else to handle the shower stuff if you need to take a break." The words hit me like a physical blow. Here I was, calling her from my car in the hospital parking garage, still wearing the paper bracelet from the emergency room, and her primary concern was about party planning. Before I could respond, before I could even process the hurt, she was already saying she had to go. Something about a client meeting, and the line went dead. I sat in my car for another hour, staring at my phone, sure she would call back, sure she would realize how cold she'd been and apologize, offer to come over after work, be the friend I'd known for over 2 decades. But my phone remained silent, except for a single text from Matthew asking if I was okay, if I needed him to leave work early. For the next 3 days, I heard nothing from Madison. I told myself she was busy with work and pregnancy stuff, that she was probably trying to figure out the right thing to say. I knew Madison sometimes struggled with emotional situations, that she tended to freeze up when faced with others' pain. I'd seen it before when our college friend's mother died, how Madison had avoided the funeral and sent an awkward fruit basket instead. But this was different. This was me. On the fourth day, Thursday evening, there was a knock at my door. I opened it to find Madison standing there with an elaborate gift basket balanced in her arms. It was beautiful and clearly expensive, filled with luxury candles, bath bombs, gourmet chocolates, and a bouquet of fresh sunflowers. My favorite. For a moment, relief flooded through me. She did care. She was here. I moved to hug her, needing the comfort of my best friend's embrace, but she stood rigid, her arms locked at her sides, still clutching the basket between us like a barrier. The awkwardness was palpable as she thrust the gift at me and asked if we could talk. Her voice was strange, formal, like we were business associates rather than lifelong friends. I invited her in, settling the basket on the coffee table and gesturing for her to sit in her usual spot on my couch, the right corner where she'd spent countless hours over the years, but she remained standing, hovering near the door like she might need to make a quick escape. The silence stretched between us, heavy and uncomfortable, so different from our usual easy conversations. "So this is really hard for me to say," she began, and I felt my stomach drop. "But I think you should sit this one out. The baby shower, I mean." She paused, seeming to gather courage before continuing. "My mom thinks it's bad luck to have someone who recently miscarried at a baby shower. Like, really bad luck for the baby." I stared at her, sure I'd misheard. This was Madison, who didn't believe in luck, who made fun of her mother's superstitions, who once drove through a cemetery at midnight just to prove ghosts weren't real. But she kept talking, her words coming faster now, like she needed to get them all out before she lost her nerve. And honestly, even if I don't totally believe the bad luck thing, I do think you'll bring down the vibe. Everyone's going to be happy and celebrating, and you'll be there all sad and grieving, and it'll make people uncomfortable. They won't know what to say to you, and it'll turn my baby shower into some kind of pity party for your situation. The word situation hung in the air between us. That's what my loss had become to her, a situation, an inconvenience, a potential damper on her perfect party. I tried to find words, tried to reassure her that I could handle it, that I would never do anything to ruin her special day. I told her that despite my grief, I was genuinely happy for her, that I could compartmentalize my pain for a few hours to celebrate her joy. She made those sounds then, those little noises that meant she wasn't really listening, that she'd already made up her mind and was just waiting for me to stop talking. Her eyes kept darting to the door, checking her phone, looking anywhere but at me. Within minutes, she was making excuses about needing to meet Connor for dinner, practically running out my door with a casual, "I knew you'd understand," thrown over her shoulder. The next morning, I woke up to a text that made everything infinitely worse. It was long, clearly carefully crafted, but somehow that made it more hurtful. She called me love, which she only did when she was being condescending, and proceeded to explain how I was super fragile and kind of a crybaby sometimes. She wrote that she'd feel terrible if I broke down at her shower, as if my grief was some kind of performance I couldn't control. The real kicker came at the end. She informed me that her sister Sophie would be by the next day to collect all the party supplies I'd been gathering. She'd reimburse me once she reviewed the receipts, like I was some kind of vendor she was terminating. 3 weeks of handcrafted decorations, $850 of my own money spent on her perfect shower, and she reduced it all to a business transaction. When Sophie showed up the following afternoon, she at least had the decency to look uncomfortable. She helped me load box after box into her SUV, the paper flowers I'd spent 60 hours making, the custom banners I'd designed, the games I'd prepared, the favors I'd assembled. She mumbled something about how this was awkward for everyone, how Madison was just stressed with the pregnancy. I wanted to scream that I'd been pregnant too, that I was stressed too, that I was grieving too, but I just nodded and helped her carry the last box. The day of the shower arrived on a perfect Saturday in early September. The weather was ideal for a garden party, sunny with a light breeze, exactly what Madison had hoped for. I spent most of the day in bed, alternating between sleeping and crying, trying not to think about what was happening across town. Matthew tried to coax me out for a walk, brought me soup I couldn't eat, sat beside me rubbing my back while I stared at the wall. Around 8 that evening, my phone started buzzing with notification after notification. Against my better judgment, I opened social media to find my feed flooded with photos from the shower. There was the garden I'd found, decorated with the flowers I'd made, the banners I'd designed prominently displayed. Everyone was posing with the champagne fountain I'd special ordered, thanking Sophie for planning such an incredible event. In every photo, Madison glowed with happiness, surrounded by the friends we'd shared for years, none of whom had reached out to me since the shower. The betrayal cut deeper than I'd expected. It wasn't just losing Madison, it was losing an entire circle of people I'd considered friends. Whether they'd actively chosen sides or simply found it easier to go along with the narrative that Sophie had planned everything, the result was the same. I was erased from my own creation, edited out like I'd never existed. That night, in a moment of clarity born from pure rage, I blocked Madison on everything: phone, social media, email, even the fitness app we used to share workout challenges on. Then I deactivated all my social accounts, the constant reminders of what I'd lost. Both my pregnancy and my supposed best friend were too much to bear. I needed to disappear for a while, to figure out who I was without the person who'd been by my side for over 2 decades. The next few months were some of the hardest of my life. I threw myself into therapy, processing not just the miscarriage, but the friendship loss that somehow hurt even more. My therapist helped me see the patterns I'd been blind to for years, the way Madison had always made everything about herself, how she'd disappeared during my hard times but expected unwavering support during hers. I began to recognize how one-sided our friendship had been, how I'd made excuses for her behavior, because I was so invested in the story of our lifelong bond. Slowly, I started rebuilding. I joined a support group for pregnancy loss where I met women who understood my grief without judgment. I took up pottery, finding peace in shaping clay with my hands, creating something tangible when so much in my life felt broken. Matthew and I grew closer through the pain, learning to communicate in new ways, to support each other without trying to fix everything. I also discovered who my real friends were. A coworker named Rachel, who I'd always considered more of an acquaintance, showed up at my door one evening with takeout and no expectations. She'd heard through the office grapevine about my loss and simply wanted me to know I wasn't alone. We spent in Almaish, Dutcherskencher den Sardans, Bistenain Easto one evening talking, and she shared her own story of pregnancy loss, something she'd never discussed at work. That night started a genuine friendship built on mutual understanding and respect. 6 months after cutting Madison out of my life, I got an unexpected call from Sophie. I almost didn't answer. Seeing her name on my phone screen brought back all the hurt I'd been working to process. But curiosity won out, and I'm glad it did. Sophie was calling to tell me she was pregnant, which seemed like an odd thing to share given everything that had happened. Then she asked me to be her baby's godmother, and I was sure I was being pranked. When I asked why she wouldn't ask Madison, her own sister, Sophie's response shocked me. "That's exactly why I'm asking you," she said. "Because she's my sister, I know exactly what kind of person she is. What she did to you was cruel and selfish, and I've watched her do similar things to other people our whole lives. I want my daughter to have a godmother who knows how to show up for people even when life is hard, who doesn't make everything about herself." It turned out Sophie had been uncomfortable with the whole shower situation from the start. She'd tried to convince Madison to include me, had even offered to personally make sure I was okay during the event, but Madison had refused. Sophie had felt complicit in the cruelty by collecting the supplies and accepting credit for my work, and this was partly her way of making amends. I thought about it for a week before accepting. It wasn't about revenge or trying to hurt Madison. It was about recognizing that family isn't always blood, that sometimes the people who truly see and value you aren't the ones you expect. Sophie and I began to build our own friendship, separate from Madison, based on mutual respect and genuine affection. The christening took place on a beautiful Sunday morning in March. The small church was filled with light streaming through stained glass windows, creating patterns of color on the wooden pews. I'd helped Sophie with the planning, but this time it felt different. There was no pressure to be perfect, no walking on eggshells, just two friends working together to create a meaningful celebration. As I stood at the front of the church, holding baby Grace while the minister spoke about the promises we make to guide and protect our children, I felt a sense of peace I hadn't experienced in months. This was what real friendship looked like, choosing to show up for each other. To celebrate joy even when touched by grief. To build something new from the ashes of what was lost. I didn't notice Madison enter the church, but I heard the sharp click of her heels on the marble floor as she left halfway through the ceremony. Later, Sophie told me Madison had shown up uninvited, had sat in the back row for less than 10 minutes before storming out. I felt a twinge of something, not quite sadness, not quite relief, but maybe understanding. She'd expected to be chosen, had probably never imagined a world where she wasn't the center of everyone's orbit. In the church parking lot after the ceremony, my phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. My hands were still damp from the holy water, and I fumbled with the phone, nearly dropping it. The text was clearly from Madison, a long, rambling message about how I'd stolen her sister, manipulated Sophie into choosing me over blood, and orchestrated everything to humiliate her. I looked around the parking lot and spotted Madison's white Mercedes idling near the exit. Without thinking, I walked toward her car, my heels clicking against the asphalt. Through the tinted windows, I could see her gripping the steering wheel, her knuckles white with tension. When I tapped gently on the glass, she rolled the window down just a few inches like I might be dangerous. "How could you do this to me?" she hissed through the gap. 2 years of planning, 2 years of manipulation. You couldn't stand that I was happy, that I was having a baby when you couldn't, so you waited and plotted and turned my own sister against me. Her voice cracked with rage. Nothing else. Maybe pain. But she was too deep in her narrative to stop. I kept my voice calm and steady, drawing on months of therapy and self-reflection. I explained that I hadn't spoken to Sophie until she called me 6 months ago, that there was no grand plan or manipulation, just two people making choices about who they wanted in their lives. I told her that her actions had consequences, that treating people as disposable when they're going through hard times might lead to being disposed of yourself. Madison's hands shook visibly as she processed this. The car window started to fog up from her rapid breathing. That's when Sophie appeared, still in her church dress, Grace sleeping peacefully in her arms. She approached Madison's car with the kind of determined steps that meant she'd been working up to this confrontation for a long time. "You need to hear this from me," Sophie said, her voice gentle but firm. "I made this choice because I've watched you for years, Maddie. I've seen how you treat people who can't do something for you, how you disappear when friends need support but expect everyone to drop everything for your problems. What you did to Sarah after her miscarriage was just the final straw in a pattern I couldn't ignore anymore." Madison's face transformed then, shifting from rage to something ugly and desperate. "You want to talk about patterns?" she spat. "How about we talk about your pattern of keeping secrets? Should I tell Connor about your little procedure sophomore year of college? The one Mom and Dad still don't know about?" The threat hung in the air like poison. Sophie had confided in me about terminating a pregnancy in college, a decision she'd made when she was 19 and in an abusive relationship. She'd never told her conservative parents, knowing they wouldn't understand. Now Madison was weaponizing that trust, that sisterly confidence, as a tool for control. Connor, who had been helping elderly guests to their cars, appeared beside his wife just in time to hear Madison's threat. His jaw clenched and he stepped forward, positioning himself protectively between Madison's car and his family. When he spoke, his voice carried a finality that made even Madison pause. You're no longer welcome at our home or any family events we host," he said simply. "What Sophie did or didn't do before we met is none of your business to share. The fact that you would threaten her with it tells me everything I need to know about whether you should be around our daughter." Madison leaned out the window slightly, her eyes finding mine with laser focus. "You think you've won? I know where you work now. I found out you got promoted to marketing director at Preston and Associates. Karma has a funny way of coming back around, Sarah. Maybe your boss would like to know what kind of person they promoted." The security camera mounted on the church entrance blinked steadily, its red light a silent witness to everything. I made a mental note to request that footage just in case. Madison peeled out of the parking lot, her tires squealing against the pavement, leaving the scent of burned rubber in the spring air. At the reception held in Sophie and Connor's backyard, I tried to focus on celebrating Grace's christening, but I noticed several of Madison's friends leaving early, huddling together by the garden gate with their phones out, whispering urgently. The atmosphere shifted as more guests became aware that something had happened, that Madison and Sophie's family drama had spilled into public view. Matthew found me sitting alone by the dessert table, staring at a piece of untouched cake. His face was pale with worry as he showed me his phone screen. Someone had posted in our neighborhood Facebook group that they'd seen a woman matching Madison's description taking photos of our house earlier that morning. The post included a blurry photo of Madison's distinctive white Mercedes parked across from our home. That night, Matthew and I had a serious conversation about safety. We'd been trying for another pregnancy, and the thought of Madison escalating her behavior if we succeeded terrified me. We decided to install security cameras, change our routines, and document everything. It felt excessive, paranoid even, but the look in Madison's eyes in that parking lot had been genuinely frightening. Over the next 2 weeks, things escalated in ways I never could have imagined. It started small, almost subtle. I'd arrive at work to find my reserved parking spot taken by different cars each day, always with no license plate visible. My work email was suddenly flooded with spam. Hundreds of messages a day that IT couldn't seem to stop. Someone kept ordering food delivery to my office during important meetings, always paid with cash, always with nasty notes about karma in the special instructions. Then Madison started showing up places. I'd see her white Mercedes in the Whole Foods parking lot when I was shopping, catch glimpses of her distinctive red hair at the coffee shop where I met clients. She never approached me directly, never technically did anything illegal, but her presence was constant and unnerving. It felt like being stalked by a ghost of my former life. The breaking point came when she started targeting my work directly. Anonymous complaints were filed with HR about my unprofessional behavior, each one vague but requiring investigation. Someone created a fake LinkedIn profile using my photo and started sending inappropriate messages to colleagues in my industry. A client mentioned receiving a call warning them that I was unstable due to personal problems. My boss, thankfully, was supportive. She'd been through her own experience with a stalker ex-husband and recognized the patterns immediately. Together, we worked with corporate security and legal to document everything and protect both my job and the company's reputation. But the stress was taking its toll. I was exhausted, anxious, constantly looking over my shoulder. The pregnancy loss support group I attended became another target. Madison somehow found out where and when we met, and she started showing up at the coffee shop across the street during our meetings. She'd sit by the window, visible to all of us just watching. Some members became uncomfortable, worried about their own privacy. I had to explain the situation to the group leader, mortified that my personal drama was affecting other grieving women. That's when Rachel, my coworker turned friend, suggested something that changed everything. Her brother was a private investigator who specialized in stalking cases. She offered to connect us, mentioning that documenting patterns of harassment properly could lead to a restraining order. I was hesitant at first. It felt like such an escalation, but Matthew convinced me we needed professional help. The investigator, Marcus, was thorough and discreet. Within a week, he'd documented Madison's pattern of behavior, including following me to at least 15 different locations, the fake profiles she'd created, and connections to the harassment at my workplace. He also discovered something disturbing. Madison had been reaching out to other former friends of mine, trying to gather information about my routines, my marriage, my attempts to get pregnant again. Armed with this evidence, I finally went to the police. The detective assigned to my case, a woman named Detective Chen who specialized in stalking cases, took everything seriously. She explained that what Madison was doing qualified as criminal harassment, and that I had grounds for both a restraining order and criminal charges if I wanted to pursue them. The choice was mine, but she recommended starting with the restraining order. The legal process was draining but necessary. I had to recount every incident, provide all the documentation, relive the pain of losing both my pregnancy and my best friend. Madison was served with a temporary restraining order pending a hearing. She wasn't allowed within 500 feet of me, my home, or my workplace. The relief I felt was immediate but incomplete, like finally taking off shoes that had been too tight, but still feeling the phantom pressure. Madison hired a lawyer and fought the restraining order. Her defense was that I was exaggerating, that she was just living her life and I was paranoid, seeing her everywhere. But the evidence was overwhelming. Security footage from multiple locations, the documented fake profiles, witness testimonies from Sophie, Rachel, and others who'd seen her behavior. The judge granted a 2-year restraining order with provisions for criminal charges if violated. During this time, I learned Madison was having her own struggles. Connor told Sophie that Madison's husband had moved out, unable to deal with her obsessive behavior about me. She'd apparently spent hours each day talking about me, plotting ways to make me pay for stealing Sophie and ruining her baby shower. He'd tried to get her help, but she refused to see her behavior as problematic. Sophie was dealing with her own guilt and grief. She felt responsible for the escalation, wondering if she should have just asked Madison to be godmother to keep the peace. I assured her repeatedly that Madison's behavior wasn't her fault, that healthy people don't respond to disappointment with stalking campaigns. We grew closer through the ordeal, bonding over the complex feelings of losing a family member to their own toxicity. The restraining order brought peace, but also unexpected sadness. With the legal barrier in place, I finally had to fully grieve the friendship I'd lost. In therapy, I worked through complicated feelings of mourning someone who was still alive, but no longer the person I'd loved. I grieved for the 8-year-old who'd shared her lunch, the teenager who'd held my hand through heartbreak, the young woman who'd stood beside me at my wedding. That Madison felt like a different person entirely from the woman who'd stalked and harassed me. Matthew and I continued trying for a baby, and when I got pregnant again, a year after the miscarriage, the joy was tinged with anxiety. I was terrified of another loss, but also of Madison finding out and escalating again. We kept the pregnancy quiet for the first trimester, telling only our immediate families and closest friends. The support group rallied around me, understanding my complex emotions in a way few others could. When we finally announced the pregnancy on social media at 20 weeks, after all the major tests came back normal, I held my breath waiting for some kind of retaliation, but the restraining order held. Madison stayed away, at least physically. Sophie mentioned that she'd heard Madison was in therapy now, working through what her therapist called obsessive tendencies and abandonment issues. I hoped it was true, for her sake and everyone around her. Our daughter Lily was born on a rainy Tuesday morning in November, healthy and perfect. As I held her for the first time, I thought about the journey that had brought me here, the loss, the betrayal, the fear, but also the growth, the new friendships, the strength I'd found in myself. Rachel was one of the first people to visit us in the hospital, bringing homemade soup and offering to help with whatever we needed. Sophie brought Grace to meet Lily when she was a month old. Watching the two babies together, I imagined them growing up as friends, but without the pressure and expectations that had twisted Madison's and my friendship. They would be free to choose each other or not, to grow together or apart, without the weight of "supposed to be" hanging over them. The restraining order expired when Lily was 6 months old. I could have renewed it, but Madison had complied with all its terms, and I was ready to move forward without the legal reminder of our past. I still kept the security cameras, still varied my routines, but the constant anxiety had faded to occasional wariness. I'd learned to trust my instincts and maintain boundaries without living in fear. Through the neighborhood Facebook group, I heard occasional updates about Madison. She'd moved to a different part of the city, started a new job, was apparently dating someone new. Part of me hoped she'd found peace and growth. A smaller, more honest part didn't really care, as long as she stayed away from my family. The opposite of love isn't hate, it's indifference, and I was finally approaching that blessed state. The last time I saw Madison was at a mutual friend's wedding 2 years after everything happened. I knew she'd be there, had mentally prepared for the encounter. When our eyes met across the reception hall, I expected to feel something dramatic: anger, sadness, fear. Instead, I felt a strange calm. She looked older, tired maybe, but also somehow softer. She nodded at me once, a small acknowledgement, then turned away. We spent the rest of the reception on opposite sides of the room, two strangers who'd once known everything about each other. That night, Matthew and I slow danced while my mom watched Lily at home. As we swayed to the music, I realized I'd finally reached the other side of grief. The scar was still there, would always be there, but it no longer defined me. I'd lost a baby and a best friend in the same year, had faced harassment and fear. But I'd also found truer friendships, deeper strength, and a capacity for boundaries I'd never known I possessed. The truth about female friendships that no one really talks about is how deeply they can wound when they go wrong. We expect romantic relationships to potentially end badly. We're prepared for that kind of heartbreak. But when a friendship, especially one that's lasted since childhood, reveals itself to be toxic, the betrayal cuts differently. It makes you question your judgment, your memories, your ability to know who to trust. But here's what I learned through it all. Real friendship isn't about longevity or shared history. It's not about who's been there longest, but who shows up when showing up is hard. It's Rachel bringing soup without being asked. It's Sophie choosing integrity over family pressure. It's the women in my support group who held space for my grief without trying to fix it. It's the friends who believed me about Madison without questioning whether I was overreacting. Madison and I had confused proximity with intimacy, habit with love. We'd stayed friends long past the expiration date because we were so invested in the story of our friendship that we couldn't see the reality. She needed me to play a supporting role in her life, always available for her triumphs and dramas, but expected to minimize my own struggles. I needed to believe that our history meant something, that all those shared years guaranteed loyalty. The miscarriage broke that illusion. In my moment of greatest need, Madison showed me who she really was, someone who saw my pain as an inconvenience to her celebration. And when I stopped playing my assigned role, when I refused to pretend everything was fine, she couldn't handle the deviation from her script. The stalking and harassment were her attempts to regain control, to punish me for disrupting her narrative. But I'm grateful for it all in a strange way. Without that betrayal, I might have spent my whole life in a one-sided friendship, always giving more than I received, always making excuses for her behavior. I might never have found my real friends, the ones who love me not for what I do for them, but for who I am. I might never have learned to set boundaries, to value my own needs, to recognize that no is a complete sentence. When young women ask me about friendship, usually prompted by their own friendship dramas, I tell them this: pay attention to how your friends react to your struggles, not just your successes. Notice who shows up when you have nothing to offer but your messy, grieving self. Trust the friends who can celebrate your joy without making it about them, and hold your sorrow without trying to minimize it. And most importantly, don't stay in friendships out of obligation to your past self. You're allowed to outgrow people, even people you've loved. Madison taught me about the kind of friend I don't want to be. She showed me the importance of boundaries, the necessity of consequences, the value of choosing quality over history. In trying to destroy me, she inadvertently helped me rebuild myself stronger. I wouldn't thank her for it, I wouldn't want to go through it again, but I can acknowledge the growth that came from that pain. These days, my life is beautifully ordinary. Lily is a chatty, confident 3-year-old who makes friends easily at the park. Matthew and I are solid, our marriage strengthened by weathering storms together. I have a small circle of genuine friends who I trust completely. Sophie and I meet for coffee monthly, our daughters playing together while we talk about everything and nothing. Rachel and I have a standing lunch date every other week. Sometimes when I'm pushing Lily on the swings at the park where Madison and I used to play as children, I wonder what 8-year-old us would think about how our story ended. Would they believe that the girl sharing her fruit leather would one day try to destroy me over a party? Would they understand that sometimes love means letting go, that endings can be beginnings, that losing someone who hurts you is actually winning? I don't have Madison blocked anymore. There's no need. She exists in a parallel universe now, living a life I know nothing about, and that's exactly as it should be. We're not friends on social media. We don't have mutual friends who share updates. We don't accidentally run into each other at the grocery store. It's like she was surgically removed from my life, leaving a clean scar that only aches occasionally, usually when I smell the perfume she always wore or hear the song that was playing during our high school graduation. The other day, Lily asked me about friendship while we were reading a story about 2 best friends. "Will I have a best friend forever, Mommy?" she wanted to know, her big eyes serious with 3-year-old concern. I pulled her close, breathing in her strawberry shampoo scent, and told her the truth, as gently as I could. You'll have lots of friends in your life, sweetheart. Some will stay for a long time, and some will only visit for a little while. The important thing is to be kind, to be honest, and to remember that good friends make you feel happy and safe. If someone makes you feel sad or scared, it's okay to stop being their friend, even if you've been friends for a long time. She nodded solemnly, processing this information the way toddlers do, then promptly asked if she could have a cookie. But I hope the message plants itself somewhere in her developing mind. I hope she learns earlier than I did that friendship should add to your life, not subtract from it. That loyalty shouldn't come at the cost of your well-being. That sometimes the bravest thing you can do is walk away. If Madison were to reach out today, apologizing and wanting to reconnect, I honestly don't know what I'd do. The person I am now can't imagine letting her back into my life, not with Lily to protect and the peace I've worked so hard to build. But I also know that forgiveness doesn't require reconciliation, that I can wish her well from a distance without opening that door again. Some bridges, once burned, are meant to stay ash. The story I tell myself now is different from the one I used to believe. It's not a tragedy about losing a lifelong friendship. It's a story about finding myself, about learning to value quality over quantity, about discovering that the family you choose can be stronger than the one you're born into or grow up with. It's about survival and growth and the surprising strength that comes from enforcing boundaries with someone you love. Madison wanted me to sit out her baby shower because she thought my grief would bring down the vibes. In the end, I sat out her whole life, and my vibes have never been better. I found joy again after loss, built a family despite heartbreak, and discovered friendships that sustain rather than drain. The girl who shared her fruit leather in 3rd grade gave me my first lesson in kindness. The woman who stalked me after I refused to disappear gave me my most important lesson in self-worth. Both lessons were necessary. Both shaped who I've become. And while I wouldn't wish that journey on anyone, I'm grateful for where it led me. In the quiet moments, when Lily is asleep and Matthew is reading beside me, when I feel the weight of our ordinary, beautiful life, I sometimes think about sending Madison a silent thank you into the universe. Not for the pain she caused, but for showing me exactly who I didn't want to be and exactly what I wouldn't accept anymore. That's the thing about toxic friendships. They teach you through contrast. Every time Rachel checks in without wanting anything in return, every time Sophie respects my boundaries without question, every time my support group friends hold space for complex emotions, I appreciate what healthy friendship actually looks like. Madison's absence taught me about presence. Her conditions taught me about unconditional love. Her cruelty taught me about kindness. I hope somewhere out there she's learned those lessons too. I hope she's in therapy working through whatever made her react so extremely to disappointment. I hope she's building healthier relationships and learning to support others through their pain. I hope she's found peace. But mostly, I hope she stays far away from me and mine, living her own life while I live mine. Two parallel lines that will never intersect again. Because that's what healing looks like sometimes. Not a dramatic reconciliation or a final confrontation that provides closure. Just quiet distance, firm boundaries, and the radical act of choosing your own peace over someone else's comfort. It's accepting that some people are meant to be chapters, not whole books. It's understanding that goodbye can be a gift, even when it comes wrapped in pain. The doorbell that rang incessantly that night 2 years ago has been silent ever since. The handwritten notes slipped under my door have been replaced by drawings from Lily and love notes from Matthew. The friend who couldn't support me through miscarriage has been replaced by friends who show up for all of life's moments, beautiful and brutal alike. And the woman who once felt she had to minimize her grief to keep a toxic friend now knows her worth isn't determined by how small she can make herself to fit into someone else's life. That's my story. Not a fairy tale where everyone lives happily ever after, but something better. A real story about loss and growth, about choosing yourself when someone you love demands you choose them at your own expense, about learning that no shared history is worth sacrificing your future peace, about discovering that the end of one story is just the beginning of another, better one. Looking back now, I can trace the subtle signs I'd ignored for years. The way Madison would always forget my birthday unless I reminded her the week before, but expected elaborate celebrations for hers. How she'd cancel plans with me the moment something more interesting came up, but would guilt me for weeks if I did the same. The jokes she'd make about my career choices that were just a little too sharp to be truly playful, always followed by, "You know I'm kidding," when my face fell. I remember the time in college when I won a prestigious internship at a marketing firm in Chicago. It was my dream opportunity, something I'd worked toward for 3 years. When I called Madison to share the news, breathless with excitement, her first response wasn't congratulations. Instead, she said, "Oh, so you're abandoning me for an entire summer? I thought we were going to spend it together before senior year." She didn't speak to me for 2 weeks after that, and I spent my first week in Chicago feeling guilty instead of proud. Or the pattern that emerged around romantic relationships. When I was single, Madison would constantly talk about how we didn't need men, how we were each other's soulmates. But the moment she started dating someone, I wouldn't hear from her for weeks. When I started dating Matthew, she found something wrong with him immediately. He was too quiet, too boring, too safe. She actually told me once that she thought I was settling because I was afraid of being alone. When he proposed, she asked if I was sure I wanted to lock myself down so young, when we had so many adventures left to have. The dynamics of female friendship are complex in ways we don't often discuss openly. There's an intimacy to close female friendships that can be beautiful, but also suffocating when boundaries aren't respected. Madison and I shared everything, from clothes to secrets to dreams for the future. But somewhere along the way, that sharing became an expectation, then a demand. I wasn't allowed to have experiences or emotions that didn't include her, that didn't center her somehow. I think about the young women I see now, in their 20s and 30s, navigating these same friendship dynamics. They post quotes on social media about ride or die friends and day ones, and I want to shake them gently and tell them that longevity isn't the same as quality. That someone can know all your secrets and still not know how to love you well. That shared history can become a chain rather than a comfort if you're not careful. The pregnancy loss support group taught me so much about different types of grief. There's the sharp, immediate grief of loss, like what I felt after the miscarriage. But there's also the slow, aching grief of realizing a relationship you treasured was actually harmful. The women in my group understood both kinds. Many of them had lost friendships along with their pregnancies, friends who didn't know how to handle their pain, who said insensitive things, who disappeared when they were needed most. One woman, Patricia, shared how her best friend had told her that maybe the miscarriage was nature's way of saying she wasn't ready to be a mother. Another, Keisha, talked about how her friend group had gradually stopped inviting her to things because her grief made them uncomfortable. These stories helped me realize that what happened with Madison wasn't unique, but it was uniquely cruel. Most friends drift away from discomfort or ignorance. Madison had actively tried to punish me for disrupting her perfect narrative. The stalking phase was perhaps the most educational, in a twisted way. It showed me how thin the line between love and obsession could be. Madison claimed to love me like a sister, but love doesn't manifest as harassment. Love doesn't try to destroy someone's career out of spite. Love doesn't involve sitting outside support group meetings like a predator waiting for vulnerable moments. What Madison felt for me by the end wasn't love. It was ownership and rage at losing what she thought belonged to her. During that time, I developed habits I still maintain. I vary my routes to work, never posting on social media in real time, always checking my surroundings before getting out of my car. Some might call it paranoia, but I call it wisdom earned through experience. The hypervigilance has faded, but the awareness remains. It's not fear anymore, just a healthy recognition that not everyone who claims to love you has your best interests at heart. The impact on my marriage was significant, but ultimately strengthening. Matthew had liked Madison well enough before everything happened, though he'd occasionally mentioned that she seemed to demand a lot of my emotional energy. He'd noticed how drained I often was after spending time with her, how she had a way of making every conversation about herself, but he'd respected my friendship and tried to be supportive. Watching him step up during the harassment was eye-opening. He installed the security cameras himself, learning from YouTube videos because hiring someone would take too long. He started working from home more often so I wouldn't be alone. He drove me to the support group meetings and waited in the car, just in case Madison showed up. His protective instincts revealed a depth of love I hadn't fully appreciated before. We had long conversations during that period about trust and safety, about how to protect our future children from people who might wish us harm. It was Matthew who suggested we needed a family password, something our kids would know to verify if someone really had permission to pick them up or speak for us. It felt extreme at the time, but when Lily was born, I was grateful for his foresight. The legal system, for all its flaws, provided a structure for dealing with Madison that I couldn't have managed emotionally on my own. Having to document everything, to present evidence, to state facts without emotion, gave me a framework for processing what was happening. It turned a messy, emotional situation into a series of logical steps: document, report, file, enforce. There was comfort in the procedure, in knowing there were official consequences for her behavior. Detective Chen became an unexpected source of wisdom during that time. She'd seen countless stalking cases and understood the psychology behind them. She explained that stalkers often escalate when they feel they're losing control, that Madison's behavior was textbook in many ways. She also warned me that restraining orders were just pieces of paper and that I needed to trust my instincts about safety. Her matter-of-fact approach helped me feel less like a victim and more like someone taking necessary precautions. The financial impact of ending the friendship was something I hadn't anticipated. Beyond the money I'd spent on the baby shower that was never reimbursed, there were legal fees, security upgrades to our home, therapy costs not fully covered by insurance. There was also lost income from the time I had to take off work to deal with legal proceedings and the projects I couldn't take on because of the stress. Toxic relationships cost more than just emotional currency. But there were unexpected financial benefits, too. Without Madison in my life, I stopped feeling obligated to keep up with her expensive tastes. No more overpriced brunches at trendy restaurants where we'd spend $200 on mimosas and small plates. No more guilt-driven purchases of designer bags because she'd bought one, and I didn't want to seem unsuccessful in comparison. No more last-minute trips to Vegas or Miami that I couldn't really afford, but went on anyway because she'd made me feel boring for hesitating. I started to see how much of my life had been shaped by trying to keep up with or please Madison. My closet was full of clothes I'd bought because she said they looked good, even though they weren't my style. My playlist was dominated by music she liked that I'd learned to tolerate. My weekends had been scheduled around her preferences, her hangovers, her drama of the week. Without her influence, I had to figure out who I actually was. That rediscovery process was both liberating and terrifying. At 32, I was essentially starting over with fundamental questions. What did I actually like to do on weekends? What music made me happy? What kind of friend was I when I wasn't constantly managing someone else's emotions? The answer surprised me. I liked quiet mornings at farmers markets, folk music, and friendships where we could sit in comfortable silence. Rachel introduced me to her book club, a group of 6 women who met monthly to discuss everything from literary fiction to trashy romance novels. The first meeting I attended, I was nervous, waiting for the competitive undercurrents I'd grown accustomed to with Madison's friend group. Instead, I found women who genuinely celebrated each other's insights, who could disagree without making it personal, who brought homemade snacks and shared recipes along with book recommendations. That book club became a masterclass in healthy female friendship. When one member, Diana, announced she was pregnant after years of infertility treatments, we all celebrated without anyone making it about themselves. When another, Coral, shared that she was getting divorced, we rallied around her with practical support and without judgment. No one gossiped about absent members. No one tried to create hierarchies or alliances. It was friendship without politics, support without conditions. Sophie and I developed our own rhythm, distinct from anything I'd had with Madison. Our friendship was quieter, built on mutual respect and genuine affection rather than shared history and obligation. We could go weeks without talking and pick up right where we left off. There was no scorekeeping, no guilt trips, no emotional manipulation disguised as love. When she was overwhelmed with new motherhood, I'd drop off dinner without expecting acknowledgement. When I had a pregnancy scare a year after Lily was born, she came over with tea and sat with me without needing to fill the silence with platitudes. The extended family dynamics were complex to navigate. Madison and Sophie's relatives were split, some believing Madison had been wronged, others having witnessed her behavior patterns for years and siding with Sophie. Family gatherings became careful choreographies of who could attend which events. Sophie bore the brunt of this, having to field calls from aunts and uncles who thought she should forgive her sister for family unity. Their mother was perhaps the most complex figure in all of this. She loved both her daughters but had enabled Madison's behavior for years, always making excuses, always smoothing over conflicts Madison created. When she was finally confronted with evidence of Madison's stalking, she aged visibly, the weight of her complicity settling on her shoulders. She started therapy herself, working to understand how her parenting had contributed to Madison's inability to handle rejection or disappointment. I felt for her, this woman who was trying to love a daughter who had become dangerous. She sent me a letter once, a handwritten apology on her personal stationery. She didn't ask for forgiveness or try to minimize what Madison had done. She simply wanted me to know that she was sorry for the pain her daughter had caused, and that she understood why I needed to protect myself and my family. I kept that letter, a reminder that even toxic people have others who love them and grieve their choices. The ripple effects of ending the friendship extended far beyond just Madison and me. Other people in our shared social circle had to choose sides or try to maintain neutrality. Some revealed themselves to be fair-weather friends, disappearing rather than dealing with the discomfort of the situation. Others surprised me with their support, reaching out to share their own stories of toxic friendships and offering solidarity. One unexpected supporter was Madison's college roommate, Bethany, who contacted me after hearing about the restraining order. She shared her own experiences of Madison's behavior, patterns I recognized all too well. The way Madison would give the silent treatment for perceived slights. How she'd spread rumors about friends who got too close to other people, how she'd create drama when she wasn't the center of attention. Bethany had distanced herself years ago, but felt guilty for not warning others. We had coffee once, a strange meeting of Madison survivors, comparing notes and reassuring each other that we weren't crazy or overdramatic. The workplace harassment had an unexpected positive outcome. My company implemented new security measures and anti-harassment policies that protected not just me but all employees. They brought in experts to train management on recognizing and responding to stalking situations. My boss became an advocate for workplace safety, sharing our story, with my permission and anonymized, at industry conferences. Something good came from Madison's attempts to destroy my career. My promotion to marketing director, which Madison had tried to sabotage, became a turning point professionally. Without the constant drain of managing her emotions and expectations, I had more energy for my actual work. I launched campaigns that won industry awards, built a team known for both excellence and kindness, and became known as a leader who prioritized both results and people. The version of me that emerged without Madison's influence was more confident, more creative, and more successful than I'd ever been while trying to maintain her approval. The physical effects of chronic stress from the friendship and its ending were something I hadn't anticipated. During the worst of Madison's harassment, I developed migraines, my hair thinned, and I had constant stomach issues. My doctor ran tests, concerned about various conditions before gently suggesting that stress might be the root cause. As the situation resolved and I continued therapy, these symptoms gradually faded. My body had been keeping the score of a toxic relationship for years. Learning to trust new friends after Madison was a process. I found myself waiting for the other shoe to drop, for kind gestures to reveal themselves as manipulation, for support to come with hidden price tags. My therapist called this friendship PTSD, and we worked through exercises to help me differentiate between past patterns and present reality. I had to learn that not every friend who knew my vulnerabilities would weaponize them, that disagreement didn't mean abandonment, that I was allowed to have needs and boundaries in friendships. The way I parent Lily has been profoundly shaped by my experience with Madison. I'm intentional about teaching her that love shouldn't hurt, that friends who make you feel bad about yourself aren't really friends, that it's okay to outgrow relationships. When she talks about her preschool friendships, I listen for concerning patterns, ready to guide her toward healthier dynamics. But I also try not to project my experiences onto her, letting her form her own connections while giving her tools to recognize toxicity. I watch her at playdates, seeing how she shares without being forced, how she stands up for herself when someone tries to take her toy, how she comforts friends who are sad. She has an emotional intelligence at 3 that I'm not sure I had at 30. Maybe it's just her nature, or maybe it's because she's growing up in a home where boundaries are respected and emotions are validated. Either way, I'm grateful she'll have better tools than I did. The concept of forgiveness has been complicated to navigate. Well-meaning people, especially those who haven't experienced stalking or harassment, often suggest that I need to forgive Madison to move on. But I've learned that forgiveness isn't a requirement for healing. I've released the active anger. I don't wish her harm, but I also don't absolve her of the choices she made. You can heal without forgiving, can move forward without looking back, can find peace without reconciliation. What I have done is forgive myself for not seeing the signs sooner, for enabling her behavior for years, for needing a restraining order to finally feel safe saying no. Self-forgiveness has been harder than forgiving Madison would be. I had to acknowledge that I was young when our friendship started, that I'd been conditioned to prioritize others' needs over my own, that staying in a toxic friendship wasn't a character flaw, but a misguided attempt at loyalty. The dating advice Madison used to give me seems laughable now. She always pushed me toward drama, toward men who were unavailable or complicated, saying that passion required conflict. She mocked my relationship with Matthew for being too easy, saying we were boring because we didn't fight dramatically. Now I understand she couldn't recognize healthy love because she'd never experienced it. The stability that bored her has been the foundation that's allowed me to heal and grow. Matthew and I renewed our vows on our 5th anniversary, a small ceremony with just our closest friends and family. It wasn't about recommitting to each other, we'd never wavered in that. It was about celebrating the life we'd built, the trials we'd overcome, the family we'd created. Sophie stood as my matron of honor, Rachel did a reading, and Lily threw flower petals with enthusiastic chaos. It was perfect in its imperfection, genuine in a way my first wedding hadn't been because I wasn't performing for anyone, wasn't worried about anyone's approval. The financial freedom that came with ending the friendship extended beyond just not keeping up with Madison's spending. I started making choices based on my actual values rather than perceived expectations. We bought a modest house in a family-friendly neighborhood instead of the trendy downtown condo Madison would have approved of. I started shopping at secondhand stores, finding joy in the treasure hunt rather than shame in not buying new. Our vacations became camping trips and national park visits instead of Instagram-worthy beach resorts. This shift in priorities allowed us to start a college fund for Lily, to increase our retirement contributions, to donate to causes we cared about. Money became a tool for building the life we wanted rather than a way to prove our worth to others. The financial advisor we started working with commented on how aligned our spending was with our stated values, something that felt like a small victory after years of mindless consumption, trying to keep up with Madison's lifestyle. The neighborhood we chose was deliberate, too. After the stalking, I needed to live somewhere with good neighbors, where people looked out for each other without being intrusive. We found that in an older suburb with tree-lined streets and kids riding bikes. Our next-door neighbors, an elderly couple named Frank and Dolores, became surrogate grandparents to Lily. They'd raised 4 kids and understood the value of community in keeping families safe. When I told Dolores an abbreviated version of the Madison story, she nodded knowingly and shared her own tale of a friendship that had turned toxic in her 30s. It seems every woman has a story like this, a friendship that became something else, something darker. The universality of the experience was both comforting and depressing. Why do we so rarely talk about friendship breakups with the same gravity we give romantic ones? The physical space of our home became a sanctuary in ways I hadn't anticipated. After months of looking over my shoulder, of checking locks twice, of startling at unexpected doorbells, having a space that felt truly safe was healing. We painted the walls warm colors, filled the rooms with plants, created a reading nook where I could curl up and feel held by the space itself. Home became more than just where we lived. It became proof that we'd survived and were thriving. Lily's nursery, and later her big girl room, was designed with intention. No pink princess everything, no generic decorations chosen for Instagram appeal. Instead, we filled it with books about strong girls and kind boys, with art from our travels, with photos of our chosen family. Her room tells the story of who she is and who loves her, not who we think she should be or what would impress others. The rituals we've created as a family are our own, too. Sunday mornings are for pancakes and puzzles, no phones allowed. Friday nights are for family movie night, with Lily choosing increasingly bizarre animated films. We have monthly adventure days where we explore somewhere new within a 2-hour drive. These traditions arose organically from what brought us joy, not from any Pinterest-perfect vision of family life. Work-life balance became a priority in ways it hadn't been before. During my friendship with Madison, I'd often worked late to avoid her drama or to earn money for our expensive outings. Now I protected my time fiercely. I left the office at 5, turned off email notifications in the evenings, and said no to projects that would require extensive travel. My career continued to flourish, perhaps because I was bringing my whole self to work rather than a depleted version. The team I built at work reflected the values I'd learned through losing Madison. I hired for emotional intelligence as much as technical skills, created a culture where people could have bad days without fear, where collaboration was valued over competition. We became known as the team people wanted to work for, not because we had the highest salaries or the most perks, but because we treated each other like human beings. One hire in particular stands out. Jasmine came to us from a toxic workplace where she'd been bullied by a colleague for years. She was brilliant but broken, flinching at feedback, apologizing constantly. Watching her slowly unfurl in our supportive environment, seeing her confidence bloom, felt like cosmic balance for what I'd experienced. She's now one of my strongest team leads, mentoring others with the same patience she was shown. The ripple effects of toxic friendships in the workplace are something more companies need to acknowledge. So many people are dealing with personal stalking, harassment, or abuse that affects their professional lives. The policies my company put in place after my experience with Madison have helped 3 other employees deal with their own situations safely. Sometimes good policy comes from bad experiences. Physical fitness became a form of therapy I hadn't expected. During the worst of Madison's harassment, I'd started running, needing to feel like I could literally run away if necessary. What began as anxiety-driven exercise evolved into a practice of presence. Running became meditation in motion, a time when I couldn't check my phone, couldn't worry about work, could only focus on my breath and my feet hitting the pavement. I ran my first half marathon a year after the restraining order was granted. Crossing that finish line felt like more than just completing 13.1 miles. It was proof that my body was strong, that I could set a goal and achieve it, that I was more resilient than I'd known. Matthew and Lily cheered at the finish line, holding a sign that said, "Our hero," in Lily's crayon scrawl. I ugly cried through the last mile, but they were tears of triumph. The running community became another unexpected source of connection. Early morning runs with a local group introduced me to women from all walks of life, united only by our willingness to wake up at 5 a.m. and sweat together. There's an honesty in pre-dawn conversations, when everyone's too tired for pretense. Some of my deepest friendships now are with women I first met in running clothes, makeup-free and authentic. One running friend, Tara, became particularly close after she shared her own story of leaving an abusive marriage. We understood each other's hypervigilance, the way we both always ran with pepper spray, how we'd change routes if something felt off. Our morning runs became moving therapy sessions, processing trauma at a pace of 10-minute miles. She taught me that strength comes in many forms and that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is just keep moving forward. The seasons marking time differently after trauma is something I noticed. That first fall without Madison felt strange. All our traditional activities, apple picking, Halloween costume planning, Thanksgiving preparation, now solo or with new people. But by the second fall, new traditions had taken root. Apple picking with Sophie and our daughters, Halloween with the neighborhood families, Thanksgiving with our chosen family gathering. The holidays became ours to shape rather than performances for Madison's approval. Christmas was particularly poignant that first year. Madison and I had always done elaborate gift exchanges, competing unofficially for who could give the most impressive present. Without that pressure, I discovered the joy of thoughtful, simple gifts, handmade items, donations in people's names, experiences rather than things. Matthew and I started a tradition of giving each other ornaments that represented the year we'd had. That first year's ornament was a small silver phoenix. Food and cooking took on new meaning without Madison's influence. She'd always been into whatever diet trend was current, making every meal an opportunity for judgment or competition. I rediscovered the pleasure of cooking for nourishment and joy rather than performance. Teaching Lily to crack eggs, letting her make a mess with flour, became bonding moments I wouldn't have had patience for in my previous life. Our kitchen became the heart of our home in ways Madison would have mocked as provincial. But there's something profound about gathering around food with people who love you unconditionally. Sophie and I started a monthly dinner tradition where our families would come together for simple meals and genuine conversation. No Instagram-worthy presentations, no competitive hosting, just connection over comfort food. Gardening became another unexpected source of healing, creating life from seed, nurturing growth, accepting that some things thrive while others fail despite your best efforts. It all felt metaphorical. My first successful tomato harvest coincided with finalizing the restraining order, and I remember thinking how appropriate it was to be creating something nourishing while ending something toxic. The garden also became a teaching tool for Lily. We planted flowers that attract butterflies, vegetables she could harvest herself, herbs she could smell and taste. She learned that growth takes time, that you have to pull weeds to help good things flourish, that sometimes storms damage your plants, but you can always replant. Life lessons disguised as gardening, preparing her for a world where not everything grows the way you expect. Music returned to my life in ways it hadn't existed since college. Without Madison's constant critique of my basic taste, I rediscovered my love for folk music, for female singer-songwriters who put words to feelings I couldn't express. I started attending small venue concerts again, sometimes alone, reveling in the anonymity of being just another face in the crowd. Music became therapy, community, and self-expression all at once. One concert in particular stands out. It was a female artist I'd loved in college but stopped listening to because Madison mocked her as depressing coffee shop music. Standing in that venue, hearing lyrics about resilience and rebirth, surrounded by other women singing along, I felt a piece of myself click back into place. I bought her album on vinyl, the first record I'd purchased in years, and played it while cooking dinner the next night. The ways trauma manifests physically continue to surprise me. Even now, years later, I sometimes have visceral reactions to triggers I don't see coming. The scent of Madison's perfume in a department store can make my heart race. Certain phrases she used to say, if I hear them from others, cause an involuntary flinch. But I've learned to acknowledge these reactions without shame, to breathe through them and remind my body that the danger has passed. EMDR therapy helped with processing the trauma in ways talk therapy alone couldn't. Sitting in that therapist's office, following the light bar with my eyes while revisiting painful memories, felt strange at first, but it worked in ways I didn't expect, helping my brain reprocess the experiences, filing them as past rather than ongoing threats. The nightmares stopped, the hypervigilance decreased, the constant checking over my shoulder became occasional caution. The question of whether to have another child was complicated by the Madison experience. Part of me worried about protecting 2 children if she ever reappeared. But ultimately, we decided not to let fear dictate our family planning. When Lily was 4, we welcomed her brother Owen. The pregnancy was anxious but joyful, marked by caution but not controlled by it. We didn't announce publicly until he was born, a choice that felt like wisdom rather than paranoia. Owen's birth was healing in unexpected ways. Where Lily's early days were marked by the fresh trauma of Madison's escalation, Owen arrived into a stable, drama-free life. I could enjoy his newborn phase without constantly checking doors and windows. His presence completed our family in ways I couldn't have imagined. And watching Lily become a protective big sister reminded me that love multiplies when shared with the right people. The village that surrounds our children is carefully chosen, but genuinely loving. Rachel became Owen's godmother without any drama or competition. Sophie's daughter Grace and Lily are best friends in the organic way of children who've grown up together. The neighborhood kids flow in and out of our backyard. There's a beautiful chaos to it all, so different from the controlled perfection Madison would have demanded. Professionally, I've become known as someone who mentors women navigating toxic workplace situations. It wasn't intentional, but word spreads. Young women seek me out for advice on dealing with bullying colleagues, sabotaging friends, or hostile work environments. I always start by validating their experiences, something I desperately needed when I first realized Madison was actively trying to harm me. Then we strategize practical steps, documentation, and self-protection. One mentee, Ashley, was dealing with a friend-turned-colleague who was spreading rumors about her competence. Watching her navigate the situation with grace and boundaries made me proud. She handled it better than I had, perhaps because she had someone who'd been through it before to guide her. She's now in a leadership position herself, paying forward the support she received. The cycle of healing continues. The intersection of motherhood and friendship has been fascinating to navigate. Mom friends can be wonderful, but they can also recreate high school dynamics if you're not careful. I've learned to identify the red flags early, the competitive mothers who need their child to be ahead of others, the ones who gossip about absent parents, the ones who create exclusive cliques. I politely distance myself from those dynamics now, protecting both my peace and my children's social experiences. Instead, I've found my tribe among the imperfect mothers, the ones who admit they don't have it all figured out. We support each other through tantrums and triumphs, share resources without keeping score, and remember that we're raising future adults, not competing for present-day perfection. These friendships feel sustainable in ways my relationship with Madison never did. The body keeps the score, but it also celebrates healing. My shoulders, which stayed tensed near my ears for months during Madison's harassment, have learned to relax again. The constant headaches disappeared. My sleep, once interrupted by anxiety and nightmares, became restorative. Even my posture improved, no longer hunched protectively. Physical therapy helped release stored trauma, teaching me that healing happens in the body as much as the mind. Looking at photos from different periods of my life, the physical changes are obvious. In pictures with Madison, I often look smaller, dimmed somehow, my smile not quite reaching my eyes. In recent photos, there's a solidness to my presence, a genuine joy that can't be faked. My children will grow up seeing a mother who knows her worth, not one who shrinks to keep others comfortable. The financial lessons learned from the Madison experience influenced how we teach our children about money. Lily has a small allowance and savings goals, but we emphasize experiences over things. She knows that love isn't measured by expensive gifts, that true friends don't require you to spend beyond your means to keep them. These are lessons I wish I'd learned decades earlier. We also talk openly about the cost of different choices. When she wanted an expensive toy all her friends had, we discussed what else that money could buy. Several books, a family zoo membership, ingredients for cookies to share with friends. She chose the zoo membership, a decision that made me quietly proud. She's learning to think beyond immediate gratification and peer pressure. Travel looks different now, too. Instead of the luxury resorts and trendy destinations Madison favored, we explore national parks, take road trips, stay in cabins by lakes. Our vacations are about connection and discovery, not about having the most enviable photos. Lily and Owen are learning that adventure doesn't require a passport, that beauty exists in their own backyard, that the best memories often come from the simplest moments. One trip to the Smoky Mountains stands out. We hiked to a waterfall, Lily on Matthew's shoulders when her legs got tired, Owen strapped to my chest. The trail was muddy, the weather unpredictable, nothing Instagram perfect about it, but sitting by that waterfall, watching Lily throw rocks while Owen napped against me, I felt a contentment I'd never experienced on Madison's perfectly curated beach vacations. The question of what to tell the children about Madison inevitably arose. For now, they know nothing, but someday, when they're old enough to understand complex friendships, I'll tell them an age-appropriate version. The lesson won't be to never trust, but to trust wisely. To pay attention to how people make them feel, to recognize when love comes with too many conditions, to know that ending harmful relationships is sometimes the kindest choice for everyone. I imagine that conversation happening when Lily faces her first friendship drama, probably in middle school. I'll tell her about the friend I loved who couldn't love me well, about choosing safety over history, about how ending that friendship made space for healthier ones. I'll teach her what I had to learn the hard way, that real love helps you grow, not shrink. The professional success that followed Madison's exit from my life wasn't coincidental. Without the constant emotional drain, the financial pressure to keep up, the time spent managing her moods and dramas, I had energy to invest in my actual goals. The marketing campaigns I developed started winning awards. I was invited to speak at conferences, to mentor rising professionals, to contribute to industry publications. This success felt different from any achievement during my friendship with Madison. There was no one to compete with, no one whose reaction I feared, no one to dim my light to avoid triggering their insecurities. Success became about impact and fulfillment rather than proving my worth. The imposter syndrome that had plagued me for years gradually faded as I realized I'd been capable all along, just constrained. A pivotal moment came when I was offered a VP position at a competing firm. It would have meant more money, more prestige, the kind of title Madison would have been impressed by, but it also would have meant extensive travel, longer hours, missing bedtimes and soccer games. I turned it down without regret, choosing presence over prestige. The Madison-influenced version of me would have taken it to prove I was successful. The real me knew I already was. That decision led to an even better opportunity. My current company created a new role for me, Director of Innovation and Culture, that let me shape not just marketing strategies, but the entire employee experience. I got to institutionalize the values I'd learned through hardship. Psychological safety, work-life integration, support for employees dealing with personal crises. It was meaningful work that happened to also advance my career. The book club that started as Rachel's invitation became a cornerstone of my social life. We read everything from literary fiction to self-help, from mysteries to memoirs. But more than the books, it was the discussions that mattered. These women knew how to disagree respectfully, how to share vulnerabilities without weaponizing them later, how to celebrate each other's insights without competition. When one member, Diane, was diagnosed with breast cancer, we rallied in practical ways. Meal trains, driving her to appointments, watching her kids, cleaning her house. No one made it about themselves or their own fears. No one disappeared because it was uncomfortable. We showed up consistently, unglamorously, doing what needed to be done. This, I learned, is what real friendship looks like. Showing up without being asked, giving without keeping score. Diane's recovery celebration was held in my backyard, a potluck where everyone brought her favorite foods. She cried thanking us, saying she'd never known friendship could be this uncomplicated and genuine. I understood. After Madison, I'd also had to learn that love didn't have to hurt. That support didn't require reciprocal drama. That true friends celebrate your survival without needing to be centered in your story. The ripples of healing extend outward in ways I continue to discover. My relationship with my own mother improved once I stopped filtering everything through Madison's opinions. I could appreciate my mother's quiet strength, her steadfast presence, without Madison's voice in my head calling her boring or provincial. We started a weekly phone tradition that became an anchor in my life, a reminder that some relationships do last forever when they're built on mutual respect. My mother, it turned out, had her own Madison in her past, a friend from her 20s who'd become increasingly demanding and manipulative until my mother finally cut ties. She'd never told me the full story before, not wanting to influence my friendships, but once I shared my experience, she opened up about hers. The patterns were eerily similar across generations, a reminder that toxic friendships aren't new, we're just better at naming them now. This intergenerational perspective helped me understand that what happened with Madison wasn't a personal failing, but a common human experience. We all have to learn, usually the hard way, the difference between attachment and love, between history and health, between loyalty and self-abandonment. The lucky ones learn early. Some of us need restraining orders to finally understand. The legal document itself, that restraining order, sits in our safe with other important papers. I rarely think about it now, but knowing it's there provides a strange comfort. It's tangible proof that what I experienced was real, was serious enough for legal intervention, wasn't just me being dramatic or oversensitive, as Madison had so often claimed. It's validation in paper form. Sometimes I wonder what Madison tells herself about how our friendship ended. Does she see herself as the victim, betrayed by a friend who turned her sister against her? Has she rewritten history to make her behavior seem reasonable? Or has therapy helped her see the patterns? Take accountability. Make amends to others she's hurt. I'll never know. And that's exactly as it should be. Her growth or lack thereof is no longer my concern. What I do know is that the ending of our friendship was the beginning of my real life. Not a life without pain or challenges, but a life where I'm fully present, fully myself, fully surrounded by people who love me without conditions. A life where my daughter sees healthy relationships modeled daily, where my son will grow up understanding boundaries, where my marriage thrives in peace rather than despite chaos. The friends I have now are fewer but truer. They know the whole story, have seen me at my worst and best, and choose to stay. They don't require constant validation or emotional management. They have their own full lives, and we enhance rather than consume each other. When we gather, there's laughter without cruelty, support without scorekeeping, love without conditions. Recently, at a professional conference, someone asked about my journey to leadership. Without thinking, I mentioned that ending a toxic friendship had been a turning point. The room went quiet. Then several women nodded knowingly. Afterward, 3 separate people approached me to share their own stories of friendships that had held them back. We're all walking around with these wounds, these stories of love gone wrong, these lessons learned through pain. If I could go back and tell my 8-year-old self sitting alone at lunch before Madison shared her fruit leather, I'd say this: that girl offering to share seems kind, and she is in her limited way. But real kindness doesn't come with hidden costs. Real friendship doesn't require you to shrink. Real love helps you grow. Take the fruit leather, make the friend, but keep your eyes open. And when she shows you who she really is, believe her the first time. The story I tell about Madison now is neither tragedy nor triumph, but transformation. 2 girls who found each other in childhood, who grew in different directions, who had to break apart for both to become who they were meant to be. I needed Madison to teach me what I wouldn't accept. She needed me gone to face whatever drives her need for control. We were catalysts for each other's growth, even if that growth required restraining orders and rebuilt lives. That's the complexity of female friendship that we need to talk about more. The intensity, the intimacy, the potential for both profound support and devastating harm. The way we're socialized to prioritize these relationships while also competing within them. The difficulty of ending them when they become harmful because we're taught that female friendship should be forever, that loyalty matters more than health. My hope is that Lily and her generation will have better models, better language, better boundaries, that they'll know from the start what took me 30 years to learn, that love shouldn't require you to abandon yourself, that history isn't handcuffs, that sometimes the most loving thing you can do is leave, that they'll recognize toxic patterns early and have the confidence to walk away before legal intervention becomes necessary. Until then, we share our stories, we validate each other's experiences, we model healthy friendships for our children, we rebuild ourselves stronger and wiser, we learn to trust again, differently but not less. We discover that the family we choose can be more supportive than the one we're born into or grow up with. We find that rock bottom can be a solid foundation for something better. The doorbell that rang incessantly that night years ago has been replaced by the normal sounds of a peaceful life. Children laughing, friends arriving for dinner, packages being delivered, neighbors stopping by to chat. Each ring is just what it seems, not a threat or an escalation. The hypervigilance has faded to normal awareness. The fear has transformed into wisdom. The loss has become space for better things. Madison is out there somewhere, living whatever life she's chosen. I don't wish her ill, but I also don't wish her well. I nothing her, which is perhaps the most complete ending possible. She exists in a past I've integrated but don't inhabit, a character in a story that shaped but doesn't define me. A lesson learned, a bridge burned, a door locked with relief rather than regret. And here I am, surrounded by the life that grew in the space her absence created. A marriage strengthened by weathering storms together. Children who will know their worth from the start. Friends who show up without being asked and celebrate without competing. Work that matters beyond titles or salaries. A garden that feeds both body and soul. A home that truly feels like sanctuary. A self that's whole, not perfect but genuine. That's my story, not about the friend who couldn't love me well, but about learning to love myself better. Not about what I lost, but about everything I gained by letting go. Not about the ending of one story, but the beginning of a better one. A story where the heroine saves herself, builds her own happily ever after, and discovers that the best friendships are the ones that help you become more yourself, not less. Some stories end with reconciliation, with forgiveness and renewed friendship. This isn't one of them. This is a story about necessary endings, about choosing peace over history, about discovering that goodbye can be the most loving word you ever say. It's about learning that some people are meant to be chapters, not entire books, and that closing one story is the only way to begin writing a better one. Madison taught me what friendship isn't. Everyone who came after taught me what it is. For that strange gift, delivered through pain but resulting in growth, I am finally fully grateful. Not to her, but to the universe that sometimes teaches us through contrast, that shows us light by first walking us through darkness, that gives us the friends we need by first giving us the ones we think we want. The 8-year-old girl who sat alone at lunch became a woman who knows the value of chosen solitude. The friend who gave everything to maintain a toxic connection became someone who gives wisely to relationships that nurture. The woman who needed a restraining order to feel safe became someone who creates safety for others. The journey from there to here was painful but necessary, breaking me open so something better could grow. And grow it did. Like the garden I tend now, like the children I'm raising, like the friendships I nurture, like the life I've built from the ashes of what had to burn. Madison's absence made room for abundance. Her conditional love taught me to recognize the unconditional kind. Her need to diminish me revealed my capacity to flourish. In trying to destroy me, she accidentally freed me. That's the irony of toxic relationships. They often deliver their victims directly to better lives, if we're brave enough to walk through the fire. Or sounds so, and So that's where I leave this story. Not with bitterness or regret, but with gratitude for the journey. For the friends who showed up when showing up was hard. For the family that chose to stand with truth over comfort. For the legal system that took stalking seriously. For the therapists who helped me untangle the knots, for the husband who never wavered, for the children who gave me reason to be brave, for the self that survived and thrived despite it all. Madison is a ghost now, but not the haunting kind. More like a shadow that reminds me how far I've traveled toward the light. Her story in my life is over. My story, the one where I'm the heroine of my own life rather than a supporting character in hers, continues to unfold. And it's a good story, filled with real love and chosen family, and the kind of peace that only comes from finally knowing your worth. To anyone reading this who recognizes their own Madison, who's trapped in a friendship that hurts more than it helps, who's been told they're too sensitive or dramatic for having boundaries, who's afraid of losing history even when it's poisoning their present, you deserve better. The friendship you're clinging to is already gone, replaced by something that shares its name but not its nature. The pain of ending it will be temporary. The peace that follows will change your life. Choose yourself. Choose peace. Choose friends who celebrate your light rather than trying to dim it. Choose relationships that help you grow rather than keeping you small. Choose love that doesn't come with conditions you can never quite meet. Choose to believe that you deserve kindness, support, and friendships that feel like home rather than a battlefield. The ending of a toxic friendship isn't failure, it's graduation. You've learned what you needed to learn, and now it's time to move on to better things. The universe has bigger plans for you than managing someone else's emotions forever. Your real friends are out there waiting for you, but you'll like it Giorgio and find them if your hands are full of relationships that no longer serve you. Let go. It's time. Your real life is waiting on the other side of goodbye.